And this is Jason Shadrick.
And this is the 100 Guitarists podcast, where every week we're talking about one of the 100 guitarists that we think you should know. Mm-hmm. Who are we talking about today, Jason?
We are talking about everybody's favorite Viking shredder who's not from Sweden.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, see, you thought I was going somewhere else. No, we're talking about Zakk Wylde. Right. One of your personal heroes.
That's right. Yeah.
We're in fashion. I mean, more in look than playing style. You've modeled your whole physical appearance after Zakk.
I'm still working on it. It's a work in progress. My hair is
You're getting there. It's getting there.
All right. If you have thoughts that you want to share with us about any of the guitarists we're talking about, or will be talking about, or should be talking about, or won't be talking about, please get at us. Hit us up at 100 Guitarists at premierguitar.com. That's 100 Guitarists at premierguitar.com. Or call or text 319-423-9734. When you call, just leave us a voicemail, and you may appear on the 100 Guitarist podcast.
That's right. We've had some great texts and emails, and a rash of emails lately. We had
lot of
uptick in emails
we must
lately.
Be selling the email address better than we used to.
That's right. That's been coming through, and the texts and phone calls are coming along. So yeah, if you want to give us some thoughts, you know where to get at us.
All right, so today's episode is sponsored by EMG. EMG pickups have been made in California since 1976, when Rob Turner invented active pickup technology. Active pickups, like EMGs, offer low noise benefits consistent across any stage or in the studio, and are used by artists including Metallica, David Gilmour, Prince, Steve Lukather, Living Colour, Judas Priest, Slayer, Les Claypool, and Zakk Wylde. EMG's solderless wiring kit comes with any new pickup, and it makes it easy to install yourself. So you get great customer support for their products. Use the code EMG100 for 15% off at checkout today, and tell them that the 100 Guitarist podcast sent you.
That's right. Maybe they'll throw in some candy.
You never know.
All right. So today we were talking about Zakk Wylde, who, would you say this? I would say so far every episode we've done have been guitars that we're personally probably pretty big fans of. Guitars we have, right? This is probably the first one where neither one of us is a diehard Zakk Wylde fan. I like him. I appreciate his playing. But if we were to both list our top 15 favorite guitar players, Zakk probably wouldn't make the cut, either one, which is cool.
I would say that is true. And I would say, on a list of 100 guitarists, most of them are going to have that caveat next to them, right?
Exactly.
Like, if we're talking about each of our top 15, well, most of the guitars are not in that.
Yes.
And I would say I'm a big Ozzy fan, but I'm a Randy Rhoads guy, and that's the material I go to. And, unfortunately for Zakk, I think that's most people are going to that material. But I come to this, I would say that for me personally, I'm coming to this pretty informed on Zakk. I've heard all of the Ozzy albums he's on. I'm familiar, some more than others, but I'm familiar with all of them. I've heard the Black Label Society stuff. I've seen Zakk perform with Ozzy at Ozzfest. But I would say that this podcast, in a way, I'm the target audience of this podcast.
Yes.
Today.
Maybe even though we talked a bit before we started recording, maybe even a little past that, because you've seen him live and you've heard a bunch of the records.
I could identify him, if I could identify my favorite guitar players within like 3 seconds of hearing them, I could identify Zakk Wylde probably within like 15 seconds of hearing him or something. Like, I'm familiar with his vocabulary.
I could identify him in 3 pick squeals. Okay, I don't need 15 seconds.
Yeah, I could identify him in
squeals.
3 seconds if there were a pick squeal in there.
If there was a pick squeal, done. I know it's Z-dub. Okay. But I know, since you two are both Jersey kids, you probably run into him around the turnpike. I don't know, exit 36 or whatever you're at.
At the Tony Soprano rest stop.
That's right.
Yeah.
You're like, hey, the guy looks like Zakk Wylde. He's back in Jersey. So, as you mentioned, he kind of came to prominence in Ozzy's band. Ozzy had this history of incredible guitar players throughout his years. Obviously, with Sabbath, Tony Iommi, and all the way through his solo career. But I would say the most prominent guitar players of Ozzy's solo career, solo years, have been Randy Rhoads, who's on the first 2 records, and then Zakk, who's on a bunch more. Right? He's probably the guitarist that has recorded with Ozzy the most, I would say. Right? So he joined the band in 87, 88, Ozzy's band, and the legend goes that Zakk was driving down the turnpike. I might editorialize this a bit. Zakk was driving down the turnpike on his way to or on his way to his job in the morning, flips on Howard Stern, because we know all you Jersey guys are Howard Stern guys, tri-state.
At least in the 80s when it was on terrestrial radio.
Right? And then he's hearing Ozzy saying, hey, I'm out looking for a new guitar player. So, young Zakk Wylde hears this, bing, bang, boom, somehow gets an audition. That I would love to hear the story of at some point. I'd love to ask Zakk the story, although he's probably told it sometimes. But knowing, I've interviewed him a few times, even asking him directly that, you probably have to ask him anywhere between 6 or 8 times to get the full picture, because he goes off on baseball analogies very quickly. I think he's a big baseball guy.
Who's his team?
I would probably guess the Yankees.
Okay. Not a Mets guy.
I don't think so. He strikes me as a Yankees guy. Okay. But I can't say for sure.
I could see that.
Joins the band. His first album with Ozzy he's on is No Rest for the Wicked. And the first song he wrote with Ozzy is the first single off that record, Miracle Man, which once upon a time, I don't know if you even know this, Nick, Zakk was a Premier Guitar columnist.
I did know that, but I knew that because you mentioned it the other day.
It lasted, I believe, 1 column.
Okay.
But the column was about Miracle Man. And it really, I remember our former editor-in-chief, Sean Hammond, was kind of spearheading that. And he was working with Zakk on it. And the idea was it to not be a lesson column. That it was going to be some other focus. And what I mean by lesson column, not like, oh, here's how you play the riff to blah, blah, blah. Or here's how I solo over this, whatever. And Zakk dutifully turned in a column on how to play Miracle Man. A lot of emojis later. Apparently, from what I've heard, his text pattern is emoji based. We had that column, which is in the archives that you can check out. But he got busy, timing didn't work out, so it was kind of a one and done, I believe, for the most part. So when I think about those late 80s, early 90s Ozzy records, No More Tears is a big standout. I think the Live and Loud live album is a big standout, and Osmosis. I think those 3 records, 91, 93, 95, respectively. I
will say that Perry Mason, that's a ripper.
Great tune. Not crazy about the name of the song, but I get it. That Osmosis came out right as I was learning how to play guitar. Like I just got my first guitar, and I thought I was a heavy metal fan. And I went to I think I went down the deep end too far and then kind of had to reel it back in, and I landed at Ozzy. Ozzy was as heavy metal as I wanted to get. As we all know, there are genres of metal more extreme than Ozzy.
Yeah.
I think Ozzy is like a fastball right down the middle in terms of heavy metal, right?
Yeah. Good
it's
baseball analogy there, buddy.
It's not like if you you could read the Ozzy song titles to your grandma and not be embarrassed. That to me is like where my line of demarcation is. Right? You're not flipping over, hey grandma, you're not flipping over a Cannibal Corpse record or whatever and being like, check these songs out. Right? Right. Yeah. But Ozzy, it's like, oh, Perry Mason. She's like, I love that show. She loves that show. Right?
No More Tears. What a pretty title.
What a name. Mr. Crowley? Oh, he's the guy down the street. Nice man down the street. Right? So when it comes to Ozzy era Zakk Wylde or Zakk Wylde era, however you want to think about it, I think you can't go wrong. You hit up No More Tears, which is one of Ozzy's biggest hits is the title, or Mama, I'm Coming Home, right?
Yeah.
You got the live stuff in 93, which I would specifically point you to Mr. Crowley. Plus, you get Zack's take on all the Randy Rhoads stuff, because they play a bunch of those tunes on the live album, right? Like Mr. Crowley and other stuff. And then Osmosis, I think, is kind of their peak in terms of their songwriting collaboration, I think.
I agree.
But they go on to play. Then so he's been kind of in and out of Ozzy's band this whole time. 2001, Down to Earth he was on. 2002, Live at Budokan, Black Rain, and then his latest studio record, Patient Number 9. Zack's on, and then sadly it looks like Ozzy's studio records are probably going to be a thing of the past.
Right.
You know, as are his live performances. But from 88 to 2022, those guys,
a bunch of records,
have been working together. A million gigs, a bunch of records, right?
So I want to ask you, I want to stop you here
yes.
and ask you. Well, I will say, prepping for this, I looked at some of the Live at Budokan stuff, because that is around the time that I saw Ozzfest. I think it was 2002. I'm not entirely sure what year I saw Ozzfest. I could not find it. I mean, it wasn't in my email. But I think it was 2002 that I saw them, and my memory of that show was that the band was extremely loose, but impressive in that they were following Ozzy. I have a distinct memory of Ozzy's, tempo changing a lot and the band following them, and Zack, and being like so impressed by Zack, and how tight they were following him. But I watched some of the Live Budokan stuff, and that was not the case by that point of the tour, at least.
Yeah.
They sound solid. They're rocking. But it got me thinking about Zakk Wylde playing Randy Rhoads stuff. I have personally, and I think a lot of people are like this, I've learned, those are the Ozzy riffs that I learned the most when I was learning to play. Those are the Ozzy riffs I've taught the most when I was teaching people to play. And they're the ones I've listened to the most and have the most connection to like the sound of Randy Rhoads' guitar playing. Zack approaches that stuff respectfully, but he sounds like Zakk Wylde when he's playing it. What do you think of the way he plays the Randy Rhoads material?
Yes, I would totally agree with that, and I think that, I think I might have either asked him about this in one of our interviews, or I've read an interview with Zack where, when he kind of first came on the scene with Ozzy, they see this tall, skinny kid with long blonde hair playing a Les Paul, and so the comparisons, even just visually, before ever hearing a note that Zack played, were kind of right there. And I think when if you think about what was it like that first tour with Ozzy, when he's coming off these bunch of records with, Jakey Lee and Randy, and there's most of the set is probably that stuff, and a little bit of the set is probably Miracle Man and the new stuff, that he probably had to like really, really pay attention to. When you go to play the solo to Crazy Train, just play the solo. You know what I mean? There's probably places you can add little flourishes, but as we all know, the little tap picking section, like some of that stuff just has to be there. And I think that also extends into what he's doing now with Pantera. He's stepping into this existing band with an iconic guitar player. The fans want to hear this stuff played in a certain way. And he needs to find his space within that to not only honor the person they're either paying tribute to in terms of Pantera, or the person that he's coming after in terms of Randy Rhoads and Jakey Lee, but yet find places to integrate his style. And from what I can tell, that's mostly just pick squeals. He can just rip out a pick squeal, you know what I mean? Because I've heard some of the new Pantera stuff, live things, and it's like, okay, cool, and then you just hear that him just laying into one of those pick squeals, and you're like, there it is. That's that's his way of injecting his own personality into
making them wild, so to speak.
Oh man, oof. Dad
Sorry,
joke. Okay, Budokan album, that live Budokan album, was that the same rhythm section you saw?
I don't know. Again, since I don't know exactly which year, It was either '01, '02, or '03. Since I don't
Okay.
remember which year I saw Ozfest, I don't know which.
Because I think that
version I saw.
arguably probably the Budokan band with Robert Trujillo on bass and Mike Borden on drums was probably one of the stronger, I think, Ozzy solo bands, at least post Randy Rhoads for sure. You know, that was you got the drummer from Faith No More and Metallica's future bass player. I mean, it's pretty hard to get better than that. So we'll put the Ozzy stuff to the side for a second. Probably some
walk
of my
me through the rest of the stuff, because like I said, Black Label Society has 16 albums. I think I've heard 2 of them. So like, tell me if this is what I know about Zakk Wylde, what else do I need to know about Zakk Wylde?
I think my favorite Zakk Wylde stuff is the Pride and Glory record. It was kind of his first, it came out, they only put out one record in 94. So he was pretty well established to Ozzy fans by then. This was kind of his first foray into solo stuff. A lot like when we were doing research for this episode, you sent a video out of him playing. What's the name of the guitar store?
At House of Guitars in Rochester, New York.
House of Guitars in Rochester, New York.
Just surrounded by walls of used amps and just like rocking a guitar store at full volume.
Yeah, right. So that vibe, that to me reminds me of like Pride and Glory. It's like a bit, it's definitely Southern rock influence. I mean, the whole album starts off with a banjo riff,
Right.
And it's a bit more sludgy than you would call it Southern rock. You could definitely tell it's a metal guitarist, heavy metal guitarist playing Southern rock, but it grooves. It kind of has the same kind of groove that like Pantera had at their peak. It kind of has this swing to it that is really interesting and really cool. And some of those tracks have popped up. He still does play some of those tracks with Black Label. Okay. But the band on that record was James Lomenzo, who's right now with Megadeth, and drummer Brian Tichy, who's played with Billy Idol and Whitesnake, and who I also went on a cruise with. More on that in a bit when we talk about the cruise.
Wow.
With Zakk later on.
So
Pride and Glory, they put out one record. Then he has put out this pretty well received solo record called Book of Shadows, which was really acoustic based. Really kind of was like almost like singer songwriter Zakk, right?
Yeah.
And then years later, that was pretty good. I remember that came out. It was in all the guitar magazines. And then later, probably the most recent time I saw him play was on the aforementioned cruise. And it was right after Book of Shadows 2 came out, because on the cruise, it wasn't Black Label. It was him and Dario, the other guitar player in Black Label, doing acoustic stuff. But
that's cool.
It was Zakk Wylde acoustic, so there were some distortion pedals. He was shred. Like
awesome.
It was acoustic. He was singer-songwriter stuff, but he was ripping some leads on acoustic.
I could get into that. I've liked prepping for this episode, everything I heard that was like acoustic based, like even, and I'm just saying that, I guess I really just mean songs with acoustic guitars. So I think there's some stuff like that on Pride and Glory, the Book of Shadows, both Book of Shadows records. I like that stuff.
Yeah.
That made sense to me to hear.
He has a good voice
how
too.
How heavy metal Zakk fits into that, and his voice really fits it. There's like, this is ridiculous, but I think the first track on Book of Shadows 2, I thought sounded. This is gonna sound weird, but it sounded like Pearl Jam.
Yeah, I mean,
he had like this like Vedder kind of like Jarl thing going on, and they were doing this open. He's doing this like open chord thing that he's moving up and down, and it reminded me of his Pearl Jam song, but I couldn't put my finger on it at the time. But yeah, it's totally different than heavy metal Zakk. I was feeling it.
It was very cool. So we got Pride and Glory, we got the couple solo albums, and then we have Black Label, which is probably the largest amount of recorded output Zakk has done. They put out 16 records. It's probably as close to like an electric Zakk Wylde solo project as you could as you're gonna get. That's like his main. That's been his main thing. Tracks Stillborn and Machine Gun Man are pretty big. Hits from tunes they got to play. Every night at the shows. I've never seen Black Label proper. But did you say you have?
No, I've never seen Black Label.
Okay, but that to me is like unfiltered Zakk Wylde. Like the sound of Black Label is Zakk.
Yeah, I could see that.
Um,
Can I point out a fun little fact? I wonder if you know.
That's what I'm here for.
Also first, this is not the fun little fact, but the Black Label Society record with the most brutal title, I would say, is Alcohol Fueled Brew, spelled BREW, Brutality.
That sounds
How about that?
hard.
How about that title? But on the record before that, Stronger Than Death from 2000, Mike Piazza, the famed baseball player, is credited as death growls on the song Stronger Than Death. That's a pretty weird one, right?
That's a deep cut guest spot on a Black Label. I can't wait. At the end of this, we're going to talk about some of Zack's guest spots. And
yeah, we could.
There's some.
We could talk about
ones.
some Zakk guest spots. I think
wild guest spots, Zakk.
Yeah.
He is, man. So Black Label, great band. That's been rocking for a while. That's I think it's kind of been on hold for a bit since he joined Pantera.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, the most fun Zakk band, I saw this band at NAMM a number of years ago, is Zack Sabbath. Great name for a band. Just his Black Sabbath tribute band. And it's just him and a couple of buddies just jamming out on Sabbath tunes, and it's great because you don't Zakk and Tony have really different playing styles, and you hear them playing Paranoid, and they're doing a faithful job of it, and then it gets to the solo, and it's there are no survivors. He's just ripping through, right? There's if any doubt, you're kind of like having a conversation, like, oh, it's a nice band, and then it gets to the ripping solo, your head's turning, being like, what's going on? What happened? They sadly don't have enough of a recorded output. But they've toured on their own. They used to be I used to just only see them at NAMM, and then a number of years ago they started to tour on their own a bit. But yeah, highly recommend the Zack Sabbath show.
Have enjoyed watching Zack Sabbath videos this week. I was impressed by Zack's Ozzy voice. That surprised me. He does a different thing. He sings in an Ozzy sound, or at least what I heard. That's generally the case, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
He like you said, couldn't be further from Tony's sound. But it's cool. It's like, I don't want to see, if I wanted to see a Black Sabbath tribute band, I don't really want to see a band get up there and sound like Black Sabbath in the same, like, that's a specific thing. If I'm going to hear that, you got to go all the way. I want to hear Laney's. I want to hear the whole thing of or I want to hear Zack Sabbath Party Band, the party version of the Black Sabbath
party band.
And yeah.
Tell you. And then his most recent thing is, as we've mentioned, he joined the Pantera. They're called a tribute. They're pitching as a tribute. They're tributing, paying tribute to the brothers. And he was dutifully chosen as the guitar player to kind of carry that on. And I think that's a great.
And he and Dimebag were tight, right?
Oh yeah, they were good buddies. And there's been a ton of stuff on YouTube you can go and watch. And I was a pretty big Pantera fan when around Great Southern Trendkill. I remember going to the mall and buying the cassette to play in my car. It was at a time when my car didn't have a CD player, all it has a cassette player, and CDs were, I wouldn't say they'd been out a while, obviously, but cassettes were starting to kind of wane,
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of always a choice, like, oh, there's this new record I want to hear. And do I buy the CD or do I buy the cassette? If I buy the CD, it's gonna sound better. I can play it at home, but I can't listen to it in the car. because I even had like one of the cassette to CD things, but it never worked right for me. The little adapters, but I remember getting the cassette and being like, that was blistering to me. And now seeing him with Pantera, I think it's such a good fit. I'm glad it was much like Trey with Fare Thee Well and the Grateful Dead.
Mhm.
I don't think anybody could have done that. I always got to work Trey into every episode, it seems like, or maybe not. I'm gonna try to from now on though. But yeah,
You don't think anybody could have done it, but other people have.
what Grateful
So
Dead?
is that a statement? Yeah, played
No,
guitar
I'm
with the
saying
Grateful
I don't
Dead. Are
think
you saying that
anybody.
nobody else
I don't.
is up to the task like Trey? Is this like a grander statement in the Grateful Dead thing?
Yeah. Like for those shows, those last handful of shows with the core four, the Grateful Dead, I think Trey was the only choice. I think same thing with Pantera. I think unless Zakk was like physically unable to do it or something, I think he was really the
It's
only
Zakk
choice.
or bust.
Zakk or bust on that.
Yeah, I could see that for sure.
All right, so that's my spiel, but we have a voicemail to get to. Nick, tell us about this.
Yeah, so this is our caller introduces himself. This is Jeff Miller called in to tell us what he likes about Zakk Wylde.
Hey, Jeff Miller from Boston calling you back because I have to also share some thoughts on Zakk Wylde. You have to admire Zakk Wylde for his incredible reverence for the music. The guy has done everything to keep the classic legacy alive of Randy Rhoads and Black Sabbath, and he approaches the whole thing with his own insane energy. And if you've ever seen him play with Ozzy or with Black Label Society, it's obvious he absolutely lives and breathes the stuff. And I don't think there's anybody who's done more to approach it with love and devotion than Zakk Wylde. And he is an absolute fucking beast of a guitar player, and there is no denying that. Okay, those are all my thoughts on Zakk Wylde. Looking forward to the podcast. Later.
All right, thank you, Jeff. I mean,
yeah, man.
There you go.
The like we talk about the reverence, like being able to step into a band like Ozzy's band or like Pantera and being able to, bridge the gap between what the people who came before you did and your personality is a very tough skill. Not many people in any genre have been as successful at it as Zakk has.
Yeah, I will say I'm very impressed by that. Thinking about the way he is, doing the Sabbath thing and making it his own, but being reverent, doing the Pantera gig, like that is a specific and very impressive skill to be able to do, to be able to have strong enough of a thing that's so identifiable, and yet use that in homage to something else that's really deep and meaningful. Like Zakk, total posy vibe the whole way, as far as I can tell, and I'm impressed by that.
Yeah. Have you ever interviewed him?
As of yet, never talked to him or anything, but I hear you have.
I have. Actually, I was just thinking about it. I was interviewing him for a feature, had to have been 8 or 10 years ago at this point. And I remember, because I remember it was like, the days where you call him up, put him on speakerphone, and you have a little portable recorder here, and you're recording the interview, and we got disconnected or something. And I was here at the office, and he just called back, and Patty, the owner, they called like the general number, and Patty, the owner of Premier Guitar, answered the phone, and she's like, hello. She's like, it's Zakk Wylde. Is Jason there? Whatever. And then I finished the interview, and then she's like, Jason, Zakk Wylde called. I was like, oh yeah. She goes, he seems so nice. So that was one time. That was the first time I interviewed him. And then I went down on assignment. I went on a cruise called Axes and Anchors, which the idea was bring in a bunch of heavy metal guitar players, and then they'll have concerts at night and guitar clinics during the day. But it was like weird. It was half people like Yngwie and Zakk and Alex Skolnick and Marty Friedman, and half like radio rock bands like Breaking Benjamin and Motionless in White.
Okay.
It was a very unusual mix. On
Yeah.
top of that,
Covering all their bases.
so you had the group of people on the cruise ship that was there for that, but it wasn't a sold out cruise.
Uh-huh.
So there were just some people like regular cruisers
Uh-huh.
who were just like, "Oh, I'm going on
They're just trying to
vacation to the
go
Bahamas."
Yeah.
And they happened to get on this cruise ship with Yngwie and Zakk. Right? And it
They're
was the
running
first,
into each other at the midnight buffet.
exactly,
"Oh,
right?
say, what do you
And
do?"
it was interesting just to like sit there at lunch or dinner or whatever and just watch, because you definitely know who's in what camp. You know what I'm saying? Like it was
That sounds
obvious.
super surreal. And were
It
you there
was-
working?
Yeah, I was there working. Yep. And there was and so I interviewed Zakk on the ship. We were down in the restaurant or something late one night, and yeah, and somewhere I have a picture. One of the photographers took a picture of us sitting at the table, and I'm very like into. They caught me like a place where I'm really like trying to explain something or ask a really in depth question or whatever, and Zack's just laughing. You know, I no clue what I could have possibly said to make him laugh that hard, but yeah, but he was always a very he's a very personable interview. Was really kind of well informed. It was just the kind of thing where you sometimes had to maybe ask the question a couple different ways to get the answer you're kind of or unanswer you're looking for. So that was the one where he did face to face, and then just this last August, yeah, almost a year ago now, I was teaching at John Petrucci's guitar camp, and I got to interview him, Zakk and Petrucci together on stage in front of the crowds, which was an interesting experience because then they can kind of play off each other. But the thing that sticks with me the most is I was sitting about 8 inches in front of Zack's amp, just how it was kind of set up.
Oh man.
And he was like checking stuff, and he like hits a chord and just like your DNA is rearranged. Like it's just like whew, right? I mean, wow, that was something. You just feel the air. You know, I was sitting right behind. Well, thankfully, I had at least earplugs in. But hearing him and John Petrucci talk and go back and forth with different riffs and how they met and stuff over the years was super fun. And so yeah, those are my two highlights of Zakk in person, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
And it's only a matter of time,
that's
Nick,
pretty deep.
before you get the chance to interview Zakk, I'm sure.
Man. Zakk, let's do it. Give me a call.
Next time that comes up, man, I'm totally like, nope, this is Nick's. It's all Nick. Let's go. Come on.
Right on.
So he also has Wild Audio, which is his guitar company, which makes a line of guitars and a line of pedals. I think the guitars are done in collaboration with Schecter and the pedals with Dunlop. And it's funny because like when he was at that Petrucci camp, it was literally a night off from the Metallica tour because he was he was out with Pantera and Metallica, and it was like literally the night, like
He just popped in.
yeah, it was literally the night between gigs or something, and it was we were in Fort Lauderdale, and so the gigs the night before and the night after were at MetLife Stadium. So I remember he come down. We did the clinic in the afternoon, late afternoon, and then he was going to play a couple tunes with the band, which was John and Dave LaRue and Mike Mangini on drums. And they were sitting there going through sound check, and then they started getting word that there was some weather up in New York, and he might not make his flight. So we pushed him to the front of the evening concert. He played his tunes, and him and his tech like, because like you can't miss a flight to go play MetLife. Like,
right, yeah.
It's not happening.
That affects what, like, I don't know how many people MetLife Stadium holds, probably 40, 50,000 people.
And you got to think, from Fort Lauderdale to Newark or whatever, that's a haul. You're not just like, you can't just like hop in a car and drive it. You know what I'm saying? So let's talk about some of Zack's more infamous guest spots.
Yeah.
Because these
I think that's a great place to end this.
So you were not familiar with this first one here, right? Until we talked?
No, I was not aware. You told me the story, but I think everybody should know this story.
This is it's out there. and it's been covered quite a bit. But in August of '93, Allman Brothers were on their reunion tour. Dickie Betts was unable to make a show for whatever reason. And they needed somebody at the last minute, and it was in Mansfield, Massachusetts, which is at Western Massachusetts. Where is that at? Is it closer to Boston? I think. Maybe it's closer to Boston.
Mansfield, Massachusetts.
Mansfield. Great Woods Amphitheater.
Let's take a look.
So through the grapevine, they found out that Zakk was available. And Zakk came in with Warren Haynes. Warren Haynes was the other guitar player.
Mansfield is right between Providence and Boston.
Yeah, so like the greater Boston area, let's
Mm-hmm.
say, right? August of '93, Zakk, who is a legit Allman Brothers fan, legit, decides whoever makes the call, they get Zakk up there, they do sound check, and they play the show with Zakk Wylde. Now, I was told from a source that Zakk was not the first choice. The first choice was David Grissom from Austin, Texas. And David was in Austin. Remember, these guys are in Boston. David was in Austin, just couldn't get the travel worked out in time to get there in time for the show. So they got Zakk. Zakk came in, played the show, and then after that, for the rest of the time between that show and when Dickie came back, David Grissom stepped in and filled, which I will say David Grissom stylistically is a better fit. However, highly recommend going to YouTube, whatever means necessary, to listen to this this show with Zakk, because you got to think.
I would say it's uncharacteristic of the Allman Brothers.
There is no doubt who is in the band on this show. No doubt, right? They're playing, I mean, what tune did we hop in on? Like Stormy Monday? Oh, Stormy Monday.
Stormy Monday, yeah.
They're playing Stormy Monday. You're like, all right, yeah, sounds like the Allman Brothers. And then it gets to the solo. And again, there were no survivors. Zakk just lets loose. And
yeah, he's not doing a Dwayne impression. He's not getting up there with
or
the slide.
a Dickie impression, which is what
Right,
the job
right.
description probably is, right? Nobody was asking him to play slide. So that is I think one very interesting point. And it's funny because the bootleg is called Zakk Goes Wild. And it was well named. And I'm sure like Zakk appreciates the opportunity to do that. Probably one of his 5 or 6 favorite bands, I would say. And I'm sure the Allman Brothers appreciated not canceling a show. And it was this kind of interesting little quirk in both Allman's and Zakk's kind of, they crossed paths there. And I'm just glad it was one show. I mean, it was not a great fit, but I'm sure everybody had a good time. There's Alan Paul wrote an Allman Brothers book that I would point you to. I think it's called One Way Out. It's an oral history of the Allman Brothers, and just finding that section about this show in there. I have the book at home, Nick. I'll have to take a picture of that page and send it to you, because hearing the people in the band describe it is priceless. So that's probably one of my favorite Zakk Wylde. That is my favorite Zakk Wylde guest performance. But as we were doing research,
I would say that's now my favorite Zakk Wylde guest
should be.
performance.
My gosh.
But it's, I think it's important. This doesn't cancel what our caller said or what we were saying before about him being irreverent. I don't think it's irreverent. I think he's just playing Zakk Wylde.
Yeah.
That's how he plays Southern rock when he plays Southern rock too. He just
right. Exactly.
It's a little shocking to hear within the Allman world.
And you got to think, he probably had less than 24 hours notice.
Yeah.
And you can step into a band like that if and probably get pretty close, So some other highlights from his guest performances here. Brittany Fox, Blackfoot, Damage Plan, Dope, Fozzy. And, all these are like, yeah, that makes sense.
There is also a song by the band My Darkest Days that he's on, along with Chad Kroeger of Nickelback and Ludacris.
And Ludacris, right? So these are all, we're doing our research. These are all like, these all make sense. Yeah. Black Veil Brides. Cool. Then there was one that another like record scratch. Hold on. Record scratch thing here that I had to go and fact check because I didn't believe it, Nick.
Yeah.
There's a band, some might call them smooth jazz. Would you think smooth jazz is an accurate representation?
I would think like smooth jazz template.
Right? They're the
Right?
Beatles
When you
of
think
smooth
smooth jazz guitar, this is what your brain fills in.
The
when
song.
you're calling the bank and you're getting put on hold, this is what you imagine playing.
There we go. The song is called Monument/Monolith, which is a bit aggressive for this band's catalog, I would say. The band in question is called the Rippingtons, featuring Russ Freeman. They put out an album in 2012 called Built to Last, and they featured none other than Zakk Wylde on the solo. And when I tell you, again, there's no doubt who's playing that solo. It's Zakk. Like,
yeah, he didn't go buy a new Ibanez George Benson model
nope.
to like play this. He's Zakk Wylde. He's using his own
Zakk
gear on this tune.
Wylde, right? So I would encourage you, after you sit through the Allman Brothers situation, we'll say, head on over to the jazz label on iTunes, Rippingtons, Built to Last, Monument Monolith. Put that thing on repeat 3 times and tell me you're not a Rippingtons fan at that point. I mean, I'm in, right? Also, put a track on Eric Gales' 2014 record, which was great. I think those two would
that makes
go along
more
great.
sense to
So,
me.
I mean, Zakk is one of the all-time. Also, we should mention this. He's been on a ton of the Experience Hendrix tours. You know, those tours of the packages of Billy Cox and Eric Johnson and Satriani's been on, my buddy Guy, Kane Wayne Shepherd, and they all go around playing Hendrix tunes. So Zakk has had a varied career. He has been incredible at
Kind
times.
of focused in the middle, focused in like the center lane, like with the big projects he's done. And then outside of that, he's stretched far and wide. He
is. Super fun interview. So I would say, where do you start? I would start with those 3 Ozzy records. Then I would go to the live Black Label stuff to get a vibe of what they are live. Plus, with that live Black Label stuff, you get a little bit of Pride and Glory in there too. And then go find some Zack Sabbath bootlegs and just vibe out to some Paranoid. I would say that will give you a pretty good overview of Zakk Wylde. What do you think?
I think you're right. I think I'm ready for the cruise.
Ready for the cruise.
This. Yeah.
If Zakk does a cruise, man, I'm 10 out of 10. Nothing is like watching Zakk Wylde in downtown Nassau, Bahamas, negotiating with a Bahamian lady on the street in full Zakk Wylde, like how you see him. That's
him in the world.
That's him. That's it.
Okay.
He's unapologetically him. Like,
not stage clothes.
No, that's him. I mean, I saw him like at between soundcheck and the Petrucci thing. I think he just like took his beanie off and brushed his hair. I mean, that was and when he was strolling around downtown Nassau, just full on. You hand him a guitar, he's ready for stage. He's ready to go.
Yeah.
You know. So, whew, I think we did it. I think we got through it all.
I think we did it. I think that you for this episode.
Yes.
For this episode, you were a great guide through Zakk Wylde as we prepped for this. I didn't do it in real time. I did it in advance, and I feel like I'm coming out of this with a good knowledge of Zakk, and I think anybody who's listening to this,
this
is the place to start.
Big thanks to EMG for sponsoring today's episode. And remember, you can hit us up at 100guitarists@premierguitar.com, or you can text or voicemail us at 319-423-9734. I wonder what that spells. We should maybe come up with a funny name to spell it out. But yeah, so we will see you all next week.
See you next week.